Hi everyone. In this bite-sized bit, we're going to discuss the 3 steps that you will always take to rename and describe your form in a brand new Visual Studio project. Let's go ahead and get started. When you create a new project in Visual Studio, you will be presented with a blank canvas. This is going to be the form where you design your user interface, and behind that form you're going to design code that performs various actions for your user. The default name for the form is Form 1, which is fine to start with, but is not particularly descriptive. So we're always going to go through 3 steps to give the form a new name. And there are a couple different places where we have to do so. In the upper right-hand corner of Visual Studio, you will see your Solution Explorer. This actually shows you the files that are behind the scenes in your Visual Studio project. And this is a place where we can modify those files. One of the files inside the Solution Explorer is form1.cs. This is the file that corresponds to the form that is on the left-hand side of your screen. We can change the name of that file. If you actually went to a Windows Explorer and looked inside the working folder of your solution, you would see form1.cs and form1.designer.cs. These are the 2 files behind the scenes that Visual Studio uses to manipulate the visual interface that you are manipulating inside Visual Studio. And we won't typically manipulate these files directly inside the Windows Explorer, but over in Visual Studio, we can rename that file and the corresponding designer file as a consequence. The way we're going to do this is we are going to highlight form1.cs, pause for a moment, and then we're going to click on that form1.cs again. Another way of doing so would be to right-click on form1.cs and choose Rename. Either way is perfectly fine. I tend to like to click, pause, and then click again, but whatever works for you is perfectly fine. It's going to highlight Form1 and leave .cs unhighlighted. You don't want to remove the .cs. That stands for C#, and that lets Visual Studio know that this is a C# computer file. So you don't want to manipulate that. But we do want to change Form1. And the default name for all of our forms in our class is going to start with lowercase frm. That is a prefix that represents form. So every form file that we rename will always start with frm. After we add the frm prefix, we need to give this form a descriptor, and it is typically going to be something that is reflected in the overall project. So this project was named Boon TED Example 1, and the form is going to be named Example 1. Nothing all that inventive here. We want to keep things fairly consistent. Note that example is capitalized and 1 is capitalized. No spaces, no underscores, no dashes. After renaming this file, I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard, and that's going to change the name of the file. That is step 1. Step 2 is we're going to change the code behind the scenes that runs with Form 1. And this is actually a very easy and almost automatic step. You can see that I have a prompt on my screen that says, you are renaming a file. Would you like to also perform a rename in this project to all references of the code element, Form 1? And what we're going to do is click on Yes. Behind the scenes, all of the code that did refer to Form 1 now refers to frm example 1. And that was done for us automatically. Very easy, but we want to make sure we always click Yes when we are prompted to do so. The third step we are always going to take to describe our form doesn't have anything to do with the actual file on our computer, but has to do with the object inside Visual Studio, this graphical interface that we're going to design for our users. You'll note in the upper left-hand corner of this form, it says Form 1. This is not the name of the file. This is the text property for the form object inside Visual Studio. And we want to change that because, again, this is not particularly descriptive. The Properties window is the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and you can browse up and down this list to find various properties and manipulate them. Sometimes this list will be in categorical form, like it is right now. Sometimes it will be in alphabetical form. I tend to like alphabetical form, but if you find that the categorical form is easier to manipulate, perfectly fine to keep it that way. You'll note that in either case, I'm going to find the text property, and I'm going to change the value next to it. It currently says Form 1, and I want to change that to something more descriptive. I usually advise that the text property is something very similar to the file name. But unlike the file name and the project name, we can use more accurate punctuation in this step. So rather than typing example 1 with no spaces, I might type something like example 1 with a space between the two words. The reason for this is, unlike the name of the file or the name of the project, this text property is user-facing. The user that is manipulating your program is going to see this text, and so we want it to look as accurate and as aesthetically pleasing as possible. So example 1 with a space between example and 1 probably makes better sense. And you'll see in the upper left-hand corner of the object form, we see example 1 text showing up to describe this particular form. So those are the 3 steps we will always take when we open up a new project. We will rename the form with FRM and then something descriptive. We will be prompted to rename our code base, and we will answer yes. And then we will change the text property for our form to something that is more descriptive and also more aesthetically pleasing. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.